Hello everyone, it's Lindsay, and today is Tip Tuesday, and I initially was just going to do a really quick, simple tip, but I've had a lot of questions about page prep and gesso, and I've seen some things in the Facebook groups coming up, and so I thought I would do a video. So it's probably going to be a little bit longer because I'm going to try to cover quite a bit, so hang on tight with me. And I'm going to be talking about page prep and gessos and matte gel mediums and that kind of thing. I don't have 10 tons of products here. I just kind of have scaled everything back to what I like to use, and then some things I don't like to use, so I can talk to you about them. I typically don't page prep. So if you watch my videos, I get a lot of questions about, did you prep the page? Typically, no. If I did prep the page, I will mention it in a video, and there's only rare instances when I prep the page. For instance, if I know it's the product, like if I want a watercolor with distress inks or something like that, where I know it's going to bleed through terribly, then yes, I'll page prep. But if I'm just stamping and my stamp bleeds through, that's okay. I'll cover it later. I'm not worried about it. So I'm not typically a prepper. It's not something I do, but I know a lot of people are worried about bleed through. And so page prep is something that you can do that will prevent bleed through in your Bible pages. So what I have here are a few different things. I have some clear gesso. This one here is from Dina Wakley. I also have the clear gesso from Art Basics. As far as these two go, they're pretty similar, but this one you can get at Michael's for about $9.99 for this big tube. Use a coupon, so it's pretty inexpensive. This one's a little bit harder for me to find where I am locally. I have to order it online, and so I'd prefer to have something that I can find in the stores. So I'll reach for the Art Basics, but don't be afraid to use this one also. I have some Liquitex matte gel medium. Ranger also creates a matte gel medium that I've used in past videos. I don't know that I really prefer one or the other. Cost-wise, this might be a little more cost-effective than the matte gel medium from Ranger, but I will link both down below so you can check them out. I have the Liquitex clear gesso. Some of you might be already cringing that I've even brought this out, but I have that to show you. And then I have some Artist Loft white gesso. So this is a gesso like these two, but it is white, it is opaque, so this will cover the text in your Bible, but I'll explain when I use that. So let's talk about application and how I apply these products to my Bible. So I have here my interleaved edition Bible. This one has a blank page in between every single page. I've been doing a lot of testing in here recently because I can go ahead. I like that I have a blank Bible page to test products for you guys, and then I can always come back in and cover it with a piece of paper, and my testing is covered up and hidden. So typically if I'm going to page prep, I either reach for the Art Basics Clear Gesso or Liquitex matte gel medium. And so the difference between these two isn't a whole lot. Gesso has a little bit more of a texture to it. Even this one, even the smoothest clear gesso has a little bit of texture to it compared to a matte gel medium. And that's because this is meant to be technically a page prep. This is meant to go underneath things and have mediums put on top, and so it needs a little bit of a tooth, a grittiness to grab a hold of the products that you're putting on top. Matte gel medium you can use as a page prep. I've used it as a page prep in the past. This is a little bit thicker than my gesso. It's still clear, but it's very, very smooth, and it is like thick. I mean, when it says gel, it means gel. Like, it is not pouring out of that. And this is used for a glue. So like if you're doing a mixed media project and you're gluing down really bulky items, matte gel medium is great for a very strong glue. It's also can be added into other paints, like acrylic paints. If you don't want your acrylic paint to dry as fast, if you're wanting to work it and blend it and just not have it dry as quickly, you add a little bit of this to the paint and it keeps it from drying as quickly. So it's a medium extender, so you can put it into things. But other than that, as far as using in your Bible, it just kind of depends on what you're putting over it. I prefer to have a little bit of tooth, just so that my products don't sit and pool and puddle on top of it, but that's just me. So let's talk about different ways to put it into your Bible. So I'm going to go ahead and just slip a piece of cardstock underneath here, so I don't get it everywhere. And I'm going to work with the Dina Wakley just because it's a smaller tube. It's easier for the camera. And then there's a couple different things. So I have the Tim Holtz or the Ranger mini ink blending tool, and you can buy these little foam sponges. These sponges, you've seen me use them with my distress inks. They're great for blending ink, but they can be washed, and so these are a great way to apply page prep very smoothly to your page. You can also apply it like the paint scraping method with a card like this. This one's from Illustrated Faith, but you could use a gift card, a credit card, something like that. You can also apply it with a paintbrush. And so paintbrush, you're gonna get brush strokes. No matter how carefully you put it on there, you're gonna get brush strokes. So if you're wanting a smooth application, then you probably wanna apply it one of these ways here. And I typically put 2 layers. So I'll put a layer, dry it, and then put another layer. And that just ensures that I've got the whole page covered. I'm gonna show you kind of how I do this here. So I'm gonna squirt a little bit onto the end of my brush. This is almost empty. That's real life for you guys. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and put some on there. And then working from the center of the page out, I can drag this towards the outer edge and get a nice smooth application. And I would have to keep going back in, adding product and smoothing this out. Then I'll go ahead and dry this with my heat tool and then come back in and apply it another layer. If you only do 1 layer, there's a chance that you're gonna miss spots and then you'll notice you still have bleed through. Also, I have found sometimes 1 layer just is not thick enough to prevent things from leaking under. So then I can take this and take it over to the sink and wash it, which I will do in a minute here. For the card swiping technique, you can apply some of this product to the edge of your card, just like that. And then holding it kind of at a 45-degree angle, you're gonna swipe this across the page. This probably gets the smoothest application and the thinnest application, but I have the most frequency of bleed through with this method. Even if I go over 2 layers, there's still some breakthrough bleed through because I'm not getting it completely covered. So you may want to do like 3 or 4 coats of it this way because it's so thin, but you do get a much thinner coat and it dries almost instantly. And that's one thing, if you're gonna put products over the top of this, you wanna make sure that it's 100% bone dry. For a brush, you can either squeeze it out, you know, on a little palette or plate or something and pick it up. I just go right in with my brush and brush it in, always working from kind of the center gutter of the Bible page out to the edges, and that's how I get the best application. And so that is how I apply it, and that goes the same for gesso, white gesso, matte gel medium. You can apply it any of those the same way. So I'm gonna go ahead and dry this really quick, and I'm gonna flip. I have another page already prepared for you guys. Okay, so what I have here is a page that I have applied a few different products. This top section here has nothing on it. It's just a regular Bible page. This section here is the Art Basics Clear Gesso, which is essentially the same as the Dina Wakley Clear Gesso. This one here is the Liquitex Clear Gesso. This one is hated by most Bible journalers because it has texture. I'm gonna hold this up to the camera. It's gonna be a little, what is it called, ASMR, where you get the little tingles. I'm gonna see if you can hear the texture difference between these sections. So this is the smoother Art Basics, and then this is the Liquitex. Okay, that was probably creepy and weird, but so I don't know if you can see and hear the difference. You'll probably be able to see the difference once I start applying paint, but this is very, very gritty. And a lot of people hate that. They're like, how do I get rid of that sandy texture? You can actually take a dry paper towel and kind of buff that sandy texture off. I'm not going to this time so you can see what the paint looks like, but you can go in and buff most of that texture off and smooth it out. So just with a dry paper towel. But sometimes you want that really gritty texture. If you're somebody who loves texture and watercolor kind of sitting into different little nooks and crannies and things like that, then this isn't a bad gesso. And if you're, you know, wanting it to really grip and hold on to things, if you're using really thick paints on a canvas or something, this isn't horrible gesso. It's just for what we're looking for page prep isn't typically what you want because it does add some texture. I have also found like it's near impossible to erase pencil off of this one. It just kind of smears and gets everywhere. Over time, my first Bible, it's what, 2.5 years old now, and I was using this gesso for a period of time, and it kind of gets a dingy look to it. I don't know if it just is so grippy it holds onto dirt or what happens, but it does kind of have a I don't know, a dinginess to it. So it just, you know, it is what it is, but I am going to show you what the difference is. And then down here I have the matte gel medium, and again, this is the one that's like a glue and is very smooth. So it actually feels pretty similar to the Art Basics Clear Gesso. It's a little bit smoother and thicker. Like that page, the page just feels thicker where I applied the matte gel medium. So let's go in and add some paints, and then after I add the paints, I'm going to talk about some other ways that you can use these products and some ways that you may have seen in some of my videos. So I'm just going to pick up, these are my Gonzai Tombi watercolors, and I'm going to pick up a pretty dark purple color here. So this is no gesso. And these watercolors are so smooth and so pigmented, it's crazy. So this is the Art Basics Clear Gesso. And I'm gonna let this air dry, and instantly you can see why I don't like to watercolor on gesso, is it pools and puddles, and that's why people are wanting the page prep, because it creates this barrier between your page and the product you're applying on it, and that's what keeps things from bleeding through. But it's almost like having plastic on your page, and so products aren't able to soak into the fiber of the paper. It just kind of sits in puddles on top of the paper, which, I mean, if you're wanting lots of texture and that kind of thing, that's fine, but I find it's very hard to control this. If I'm wanting to paint intricate details in a stamp or something like that, I hate working on gesso because it's just unpredictable and frustrating. I mean, now I have these giant pools of color. So the Liquitex, I'm curious to see if you'll be able to see a difference with that extra grain. You can hear it. So now what you can see is it's not pulling away quite as quickly as it was on this one because it's not as smooth. So it's able to kind of hold on to that paint. So I actually kind of prefer the Liquitex gritty gesso over to some of the smoother gessos if I'm going to use a watercolor, because you can see it is kind of holding on to the paint. It's still puddling a little bit because it is creating that barrier, but not as bad as it is up here. And then the matte gel medium is very smooth. I did apply it with a brush, so there's brush strokes. I applied it with a brush, 2 coats. And you can see how, I mean, that's like a giant puddle of paint right there. So, and I applied pretty much the same amount of paint and water to all of those swatches. So let's go ahead and daub up some of that extra paint here. So if you're working with watercolors, I see a lot of people in the Facebook group saying, you know, I want to color what gesso, watercolor, what gesso do I use? You do not have to use gesso to watercolor in your Bible pages. I have a whole playlist on my YouTube channel of just entries where I've used watercolor, and you'll see it does not bleed through. If you use cheap Crayola watercolors, then yes, it's gonna bleed through. But even these really rich Gonzai Tombi, I'll flip it over and you'll be able to see. These don't bleed through. The Prima watercolors don't bleed through. What else? The Illustrated Faith watercolors don't bleed through. The Jane Davenports don't bleed through, is my understanding. So there's a lot of watercolor paints that you can use and they don't bleed through. And you can see I get a much smoother, controlled look on the no page prep. So I'm going to hit this with my heat tool just to dry it so I can turn the page over and you can see what the bleed through looks like. Okay, so it's all dry. I just kind of picked up any giant puddles. And then as I flip this over, I mean, you can see there's a little less shadowing between the no gesso and the gesso, but they've all basically shadow. There's no bleed through. You see how deeply pigmented that paint was, and it did not bleed through the page. And I was not gentle about glopping paint on there, and it didn't bleed through. So if you're wanting, you know, the texture, yes, is pretty, and it's pretty with one color, but if I was to start adding other colors in there and it's beating up, you're more likely to get mud, and things are just gonna kind of sit and just have concentrated areas of color, and you're just gonna, I think, be frustrated if you're watercoloring over mediums like this. I'm trying to see if I have a Sharpie. I do have a Sharpie. Okay, so one nice thing about page prep though is you can really use a lot of different products. So this is a Sharpie. Some of you are like, oh my gosh, Lindsey, what are you doing? So you can see Sharpie bled through, and we know Sharpie bleeds through, but over page prep, you could block in a whole page with Sharpie and it's not gonna bleed through the gesso or the matte gel medium or any of those page prep products. So if you're wanting to use, you know, products like Sharpies and things like that that bleed through, then you want a page prep and it'll give you that ability to do that. I have a video where I showed how I used Crayola markers. Crayola markers bleed through like crazy, but I did gesso beforehand and I was able to go in and paint with Crayola markers and scribble with Crayola markers and nothing bled through. So there is that. Now let's talk about some other creative things you can do with page preps. Okay, so one fun thing that you can do with these products, aside from just prepping your page, is you can use them with water-soluble products. I have a Neocolor 2 crayon here. This is a product that dissolves with water. Gelato, this is a water-soluble pigment stick. And you can use these to tint these products, and then you could use it as a glaze over the entire background of your page. You can use it through a stencil, and that kind of thing. So if I was to take, let's say, a Neo 2 crayon, and I'm going to color out quite a bit of this product onto there, and then I have a gelato. Gelatos are a little bit easier for this process just because you get so much in a stick. You can actually like chop off a chunk and use that. You can even use distress inks because they react with water, and use that to tint things. I'm trying to find a palette knife here. Okay, here's one. Okay, so I'm just going to take a little bit of the matte gel medium and I'm going to mix it in with that Neocolor crayon. You do have to like work it for a second. So then now I've got almost like a paint that I could apply through a stencil. I could use like the card scraping technique or that mini ink blending tool. And maybe when you're prepping your page, you don't want it clear. Maybe you just want an entire page that's this blue color. You could apply this to the entire page and have it tinted that color. Same thing with the gelato. Now I have found it works better with the matte gel medium because it is thicker, because it kind of has that thicker gel like consistency. It's a little bit easier to work with, but you can do it with gesso. If you're going through a stencil, I would stick with using the matte gel medium. Gesso is just thinner and it's going to bleed underneath your stencil. So, and I have some videos. I'll try to remember to link them down below. I have a very, very old video, and I think I have a newer one showing how I apply that through a stencil. But then there's gelato. So then you have this like glaze. It's completely transparent. You could build it up to be opaque. If you put it through a stencil, it does become pretty opaque depending on how much pigment you mix with it. But so there is some things that you can do with matte gel medium and gesso. For white gesso, I have this one here. So this one is pretty gritty. It's Art Basics, so it's a very inexpensive brand. I use this to cover bleed through sometimes. If I have got a lot of bleed through that's come through a page and I want to cancel out that bleed through, I'll apply a bunch of white acrylic gesso. Or if I really pile this on thick, it kind of dries with like cracks and crevices in it, which really makes for... Sorry, I'm just looking outside and it's snowing, and I live in the Central Valley and it doesn't snow, so this is a little bit amazing. Anyways, speaking of white gesso, there's snow outside. And so it creates these cracks and crevices that hold the paint and really add some pretty texture. So it just kind of depends on what you're wanting. This will cover the text completely. So if I was to go over my page with this, it will cover the text. So just be aware of that. And so there's just a quick look at page prep. I know there are some YouTube channels out there that have completely dedicated their lives to page prep and informing people about page prep. That's not really my thing, just because I don't use a lot of page prep. So if you have questions, feel free to leave them down below. I will try to answer them best I can. And if you want to help each other out with product recommendations and things like that, go for it down there. But there's just a look at how I use it in my Bible journaling. Definitely give this video a thumbs up if it was helpful. Subscribe to my channel if you're not already subscribed. If I mentioned that I was going to link something and I forget to, please remind me in the comments. I sometimes go linking all kinds of things and I forget. So please remind me. And until next time, thank you so much. Bye-bye.